I'm doing them a disservice if I don't do that. And quite honestly, I look back at my own situation. I wish someone would have shown me where my blinders were earlier in the process so I didn't have to have such a hard fall.
Today on the podcast, we have Jeremiah Dickey. Jeremiah is the athletic director at Boise State University, my alma mater. Blue-collar kid that grew up in El Paso, Texas, and he's just had an amazing journey personally and professionally through the world of college athletics and athletic departments. Has a lot to share with us about success, about hard work, about staying humble, and it was my honor to share some time with him. So with that, I give you Jeremiah Dickey. Well, Jeremiah, it's good to see you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
How you been?
Been great, man. You know, life is what you prioritize. So it's been hectic, but very grateful. Very
Christmas,
grateful for this
holidays,
chapter.
was that just a blur, or how was it?
Honestly, this year was awesome. It filled my bucket. You know, I ended up traveling over 3 months last year, and it's the most travel I've ever done, specifically as an athletic director. And having an early bowl game, I hadn't been home to see my family, and I hadn't seen my wife's family in quite a while. And so we were able to go see both families in El Paso, Texas, and then in Chicago or outside Chicago. And even though it was more travel, and you know, we got back on a Saturday, had a day of rest on Sunday, and then I hit the ground running again on Monday. And then the whole break, because of transfer portal and transition of coaches, it was pretty consistent and constant on the phone and talking to Spencer, making sure I was doing, you know, my part and trying to help out as much as I could. But sometimes you need those moments. You know, I hadn't seen a niece and a nephew. My sister had 3 kids, and 2 of them within 2 years of each other, and I just hadn't been home. And so that was needed and something that I need to do a better job of.
You mentioned the transfer portal, and not to jump right into a difficult topic, but I got to ask you, do you ever feel in your seat on the bus as the AD, like, oh, we did such a great job when that portal closes? Or do you feel like every time you're just trying to get through it and save as much skin as you possibly can? How do you feel about the transfer portal process? And do you feel like it was a win this year, or is it ever a win?
I do believe it was a win, and you go through these emotional roller coasters. There's this relief, like we made it. You know, we were able to hold on to most of our guys. You know, all things considered, and when you look at the number of guys that entered the portal, there were really only 2 student athletes that I think that I know we wanted to keep. And so our numbers are really good, and that's a testament to Spencer and the culture he's built. And you know, you got to really want to be a Bronco.
That's right.
We represent something bigger than ourselves. So the portal process in general, I'm glad we have one portal. I would prefer that portal opening be at a different time of year, just because you're going from season into first signing day in December. The guys are plus we had a bowl game this year. Then you're coming out of that once you get your signing class, and then you're going right into the portal. And that's challenging, but it is what it is. It's the job. So there's some relief. There's some excitement. You know, I think Spencer and our crew, we had a very specific process, plan the work the plan. Spencer stuck to that plan and what he was looking for and what we needed to backfill based on the guys that maybe hadn't developed or that we needed more from. And, you know, and for a school like ours, which we have extremely high expectations, those portal openings and recruiting classes are so important to the development of our program and what the second and third team looks like. You know, depth is the biggest challenge for us compared to, say, a Power 4 team. And so you can't necessarily plug and play. You lose a starter, and you may be in the process of developing a kid because they're a freshman or a sophomore. It's just a completely different ballgame.
It's so funny to hear you say that, because I just recorded a show a couple weeks ago. I was on a buddy of mine's podcast, and he grew up around here and was a Meridian High School guy, played football, and so we were just kind of kicking around old times. But, you know, he asked about the Fiesta Bowl in '07 we beat Oklahoma and
Yeah.
that whole team and that whole year and the whole game. But that was the number one thing I always focus in on when I talk about the story of that game is the fact that like our starting 11 could play with anybody in the country, but we had no depth.
Yes.
And that's, the story of that game against Oklahoma.
Yeah.
To go back. So it's interesting to hear you articulate that is still a problem, if not the problem today.
Yeah. And look, it is what it is. That's not, we're not a program that makes excuses. I mean, I think you've heard Spencer talk enough of, control we can, and that just puts the onus back on us to develop our student athletes much sooner in the process. And then it's easier for us, quite honestly, to hold on to our guys once we get them in versus going to the portal due to the cost of doing business. The portal is expensive.
Yep.
I can't throw, a couple $1 million at whether it's a quarterback or a running back or a defensive lineman, offensive lineman. I mean, there are certain positions that have extreme value in our industry. And we've seen that over and over, especially as now we've gotten into this portal world. And, I feel very confident and I look at I'm so grateful for Spencer. I look at how he operates and as a leader, I think it's important to always look in the mirror first and foremost. Sometimes we tend to project like this is because of this person or this situation. The reality is control, like we have control over a lot of this. And if you can't look in the mirror and own what's yours and we're never a finished product. So what did we learn from the CFP season? What did we learn last season? Getting to the top of the mountain is one thing. Staying at the top of it is a completely different thing. And I'm so proud of what our team did this year. Even going into November, we were still in the running for that CFP spot. A few injuries here or there, and we lose a game. Maybe that hindsight's everything, and it is what it is. Like you do the best you can. I mean, no one shows up to lose. that.
Yep.
But what did we learn coming out of that? All right, maybe we need a little more depth here. Maybe we need to really hammer home certain qualities or characteristics of the guys that we're bringing in, and that idea that you got to love football and you got to want to be a Bronco first and foremost. And it can't be money. No one in our department, student athlete or staff, which includes coaches, is a Bronco because of what they get paid. Every single person in my department and on my team could go somewhere else and get more. You have to really want to be here and to serve and to represent something bigger than yourself.
And you would, being the man that you are and with your values, and just as well, you and I obviously know each other.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have it any other way, right?
Correct.
I mean that's kind of the interesting thing too. I think about Boise State and even your position is, even if you were at a university that had all the money in the world and that wasn't a concern, you still wouldn't want it to be all about the money.
Correct.
Right?
No, absolutely. I mean, that's something that is innate in me. That's how I was raised. That's probably why my goal was never to be the AD at a Power 4 school. In some ways I need that chip on my shoulder. I want the work to matter. I want to do epic, and not necessarily have it handed to us or and it doesn't mean like, look, we all need more. And I would say the Power 4, they're dealing with different zeros, but everyone is struggling right now. How awesome is it that we get to do what we do on a daily basis, stretch the dollars, pour into our kids, impact this community long after they're playing on the blue or whatever field of play. And like, that's a bucket filler for me. That ties into the why. We talk a lot about our why in the office. And with my team, what really drives you. And for me, work ethic is undefeated. If I know if I give 100% and I know I'm willing to do more than what most will, I know that becomes a competitive advantage. And I have a group of teammates around me that feel that the same way.
Jeremiah, I remember when they hired you, you and I had lunch not long after that down at Fork. And I thought, I was very curious to meet you. Who's this guy from Baylor and what's he all about? Yeah. And these values that you're articulating now is immediately what just hit me in the face. And I was so excited to have you. And I was like so excited that you joined, the Broncos. Where does it come from? Talk to me about your upbringing, your parents' influences on you from an early age. You mentioned a chip on your shoulder. Where does that come from?
So first and foremost with my dad, my mom too. I shouldn't, my mom was amazing. My dad worked very hard. I mean, when I was born, in a very young family, my parents were, married a year, and then, my mom was pregnant. I think they were 20 and 21. Coming to them at that point in their life, they hadn't figured everything out, and they did a phenomenal job considering the hand they were holding. And to see my dad work, an 8 to 5 job and then come home and go to the second job. And as a kid, you don't know what you don't know. And so I would see him do this. And as I got older, I realized like, wow, he was doing that to put food on the table and a roof over our head. And just that work ethic, it mattered. And, and then there were moments in my life that, for example, I probably matured a little bit later in the process. And so you go from being, one of the starters and competing across the board in every sport and one of the better players in a humble way. But then all of a sudden people catch you, and I remember being in 7th grade. I tried out for the 7th grade basketball team. I made it. I didn't get to play all that much. And then 8th grade, it was even worse. I mean, at this point in time, it was parents started to get more involved. My dad did not, and that's something I'll talk about. Now all of a sudden there were 20 plus kids on an 8th grade basketball team. And, and which I have thoughts on that. And not everyone should get a trophy. And quite honestly, I probably should have been cut. And I can say that now. But I remember not, there were only so many uniforms. And I remember being on the bench, being on the team, but being in a tracksuit at the end of the bench because there weren't enough uniforms for me. So there was no possible way I was getting into the game. And I remember going home and being upset. And it was the first moment in my life that I remember projecting that on someone else, meaning I would tell my dad and go home and be upset to my mom and dad and specifically my dad and say, they don't see this. And I just started pointing the finger. And I remember him telling me, no one cares, work harder. Like, that's life. No one cares, work harder. If you feel you are deserving of, you better go out and earn it. And I'm not talking to your coach. You go talk to your coach and you tell him how you feel and you tell him what you're going to do to be able to get a uniform and then play and so on and so forth. I did. I went to my 8th grade coach and I said, I'm better than every guy in front of me. And he says, well, then show me. And after practice every day, I had to work really hard in practice. And then after practice every day, I started to play the person in front of me one-on-one. And I'd play him after. And slowly but surely as the season went on, I went from not having a uniform and being in this tracksuit to then beating the 19th, the 18th, the 17th. And I just kept going. By the end of the season, I was starting. And I remember the coach pulling me aside and saying, I've never seen anything like this. And whatever you do in life, you will be successful if you're willing to put the time, energy, and effort into it. And it was this aha moment of, I may not have all the talent in the world. I may not be the smartest guy, but I know that if I'm willing to show up through good and bad, that there are very few people that will beat me because I will do what's necessary to find success. And that level of commitment, it really opened my eyes to a whole new world. And subsequently it dominoes into what I'm doing today. But those seeds that were planted. And I mentioned my dad, he said, and I actually talked to my mom, like my dad wouldn't go to practice. He would stand on the side at games. He would cheer like he was, my biggest fan, but he was never, as they're developing booster clubs for the kids and, and parents are involved and they're coming to practice and they're doing pizza party, all this stupid stuff we do. As they were doing that, my dad was never around. And it bothered me. And I remember going to my mom and saying, does dad not care? And this continued into high school. And so I was still learning these life lessons from him. And she said, she called me Bubba. Bubba, the reason he doesn't come is because he wants you to earn it. It's not going to be because of him or me. It's not going to be because of money we give. It is because you will earn it. And whether you play or not, we are proud of you. And that's it. And it was just, once again, this additional aha moment of, wow, like he was still teaching me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he didn't necessarily communicate that. And this whole time I'm judging him. I'm upset.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my relationship with him was a little tainted because I'm like, he doesn't care. It was actually it was opposite. He cared so much about me. And as a father, you know this, and you know, try not to get emotional about it. But, you know, I try to take the same approach with my kids. You know, our job is not to be their best friend. You know, our job is to lead them and prepare them for life, because life is hard and it does suck quite a bit.
Don't you feel, and I can only speak from the perspective of a son and a father. Obviously, I have a daughter, and my relationship with her is you know, different, I would say, than it is with my son. And my son's young, but I can already see the difference that's going to be between the two of them. You know, your kids are so different. Yeah. But don't you think as a son, like, you kind of have to have a little bit of an axe to grind with your old man?
I think so.
Don't you think you kind of just like have to, you know, have a little bit of a, you know, because if he just gives you everything you want, then where's the growth? And what is he teaching you if he just hands you everything that you want on a silver platter?
Correct.
I mean, it needs to be hard.
Yes.
Like, life is hard.
Correct. And I think we've lost a lot of that. And, you know, and I absolutely agree. And look, I mean, you know this, it's gutting. You know, when I have to have those conversations with my kids, it is the opposite of me not loving and caring about them. I care about them so much and love them so much that I'm going to hold them accountable. And there will be a level of discipline and expectations defined. And, you know, and they will learn and grow in that process. Nothing is handed to you. Everything is earned. And that's where no one cares work harder comes from.
And I know you can relate to this because of the man you are, but as the father, turning down the flip side now, because that's where we're at.
Yeah.
You almost have it's almost a deep sadness that's hard to describe that hits you sometimes.
Yeah.
Because you know the role that you play, and you know that you're going to have to do things that are going to disappoint your kids, and you're going to have to do things that are hard.
Yes.
Because it's your job to provide them with this resistance that the world is surely going to provide, and then some. You know, it's your job to provide standards and discipline,
correct,
and accountability. And sometimes accountability is hard.
It is hard, and you know, no, there are very few promises in this world, and obviously my faith's important, and you know, I know I'm forgiven. I know I'm going to heaven, and outside of that, everything else is given up to God, and there's a process, and you know, and there's a level of ownership that's required of you and I as fathers and husbands, and you know, and the work never ends. You know, there's very few moments that you know, I was talking in my Bible study group this weekend, you know, rest and retreat, and I'm not saying it's not important, but there's very little rest and retreat.
Little,
you know, it's no one cares work harder, and the responsibilities are endless, and I think a lot about that with my dad, of the things he was teaching me, whether he knew he was teaching me it or not, of his work ethic and how he showed up and how he, you know, took care of my mom and the kids, and I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful because that's something that no one can take away from you, you know, and it doesn't mean, you know, being very clear, I've learned so much more from failing than success. I've failed too many times to even mention, but I've learned so much from that, and I think that's something that's important. You know, how we show up, and it's not perfect. It never will be perfect, but there is a strategy, a plan, a process, and I know if I continue to put my best foot forward and give 100%. Good things are going to happen, and everything, the good and the bad, goes up to God, and you know, and if I can hold myself accountable to that, that's how I define my personal success. That's how I define whatever I want my identity to be, and the legacy I leave, and it's first and foremost in those kids.
You know, Jeremiah, these the relationships that we have with our parents are so important, and they shape so much of our worldview. And I've always just been very interested about that topic. And one of the things I've observed about it is that when you run across people in life who haven't come to terms with who their parents are and who they're not, and they haven't, you know, forgiven the mistakes and embraced the things that their parents did well, and really I think haven't matured to the point where like they can just see their parents as people that were doing the best they could.
Right.
Those people oftentimes struggle. In other words, I think part of becoming a man is like looking at your dad and understanding that he was doing the best that he could, and maybe he wasn't perfect. And and I'm sure he would probably, just like you and I would already go back and probably do some things differently if we could. But I just think as sons growing up, you have to get to a point where you can kind of embrace it for what it is, take the lessons out of it you can take, and accept your dad for who he is, whether he's still alive or not.
Correct.
And I've seen that happen so often. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, if you've observed the same thing in people.
100%. And it's the older I get, especially being a father, like that, becoming a dad, it hits you right in the face. And then all of a sudden you start, for me, I always look inward and I start thinking about my upbringing and what he did or didn't do. And that level of grace and I guess lack of judgment on him of like, he did the best he could with the hand that he was dealt. And that's not an indictment on his dad and mom and whatever, but he did a phenomenal job. Was it perfect? No, it wasn't, but that's okay. Like I'm not perfect. And, he gave me the confidence, the resources to a certain extent. It was important that my life was going to be better than his, and he was willing to sacrifice his for me. And I think about my faith, and there's all these connections, and that's such a relief, and it brings peace. It does not guarantee success, and it isn't always peaceful. There are hard times, but it's so much easier for me to look at my dad and the relationship I have with him today, and just have a tremendous amount of appreciation and love for him, because he's this rock in my life and helps me. And my mom, same thing, and more motherly, but every time I talk to her, she says, "Buddy, we love you, and we don't care, how successful you are, or what. We just want you to be happy. We want you to be a good Christian, a father, husband." Even to this day, in their older age, and how they approach me. And I mean, I try to talk to them as much as I possibly can, but they have filled a gap in many ways that I'm not sure I appreciated early. I know I didn't appreciate early on, that as I get older, their wisdom and experiences have really impacted me in the decisions I make today.
I think the reality is that, like, if you have a couple parents that love you, you won the lottery.
100%.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, I that's the point I reached a long time ago, looking at my background and my parents and things I thought they maybe did right or did wrong. It's like, listen, there's so many kids that don't even have parents, or that don't have parents that love them and that don't support them. And my heart just breaks for them. Yeah. But I also feel so grateful that I had a couple parents who loved me.
I couldn't say it any better.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that I think the human side is we take it for granted, and I think now having 3 kids and being married, and I said it earlier, life is hard. It's not easy. Marriage is work. I mean, the fact that my parents are still together, and there were I remember the peaks and valleys. Yeah. And the fact is they never quit, and and they're better for it, and it's made me the father and husband that I want to be. I'm not a quitter, and and that's something that you can build off of. That becomes foundational. It doesn't mean it's not going to be that it's going to be hard or easy, or it is what it is. Everything that I approach on a daily basis that hits my desk, it's like, all right, you start with, I can do this, and a lot of that comes from that affirmation and support that they provided over many years and still provide to this day.
What was growing up you grew up in El Paso, is that right? Did I catch that?
Yeah,
what was that? What was that like? There's not a lot of people that grew up in El Paso, Texas.
And when you find us, there's a couple people here I'll meet from El Paso, some former Broncos or still Broncos. Once a Bronco, always a Bronco. But there's a connection. I mean, if you've ever been to El Paso, you are completely separated from the real world.
I've been there once. We played UTEP down there.
Yes.
So,
yeah. I mean, and those were my first athletic memories. It was at UTEP, but El Paso was a great place to grow up. I wouldn't have had it any other way. It's not a place that you're going to, like if you were going that I could give you, 10 things to do. I mean, there's some cool things, but like it's not a destination per se.
Right, for sure.
But the people are just great people. And growing up in a border community, and going to Mexico as a kid and it just provided a different level of experience, I guess. And it just makes me really proud. I think a lot about what I represent and it's not just this community. It's not just my family. It's my family back in El Paso. It's my family and now, with my wife and outside of Chicago and, you represent something bigger than yourself. And I firmly believe, and hopefully I'm doing it at a high level, that I represent El Paso. It's a community I love and care about, and I don't get home as much, but you can't forget where you come from.
That's right.
And it wasn't easy, but you don't know it at that time. Like it was a different place, but I look for these man or mouse moments. And I think a lot of my work ethic, because I remember, Nick, at going to UTEP games. I remember early on, like UTEP, when you could control times of games, they always played later on Saturday. The reason they did that, and when I went back to UTEP to work, that was my first job out of college. It's because the majority of El Paso was blue collar. They had to work Saturdays.
Yep.
And so you couldn't get people at games because of their jobs. And this idea that, we work Monday through Friday and then you get 2 days of rest. And, that's just not what I was raised in. It was work 24/7. It doesn't mean you didn't go to church. Doesn't mean you didn't prioritize the priorities. I don't believe in work-life balance. It's life and you prioritize what's important. And a lot of that came from my upbringing in El Paso.
Yeah. What, growing up in a border town, I'm curious about that. Talk to me about that. What was that like?
It was a lot more fun when I was in high school.
I bet.
We'd go to Mexico and act like adults. And
but Juarez isn't exactly the safest place to go hang out. Is it?
It's funny. Like every 10 years or so, there would be the cartel would fight, and when you grow up in it, it's not. It's like this is just what happens, And when someone was in control, there was a lot more peace, and probably I was fortunate because I was probably the last generation that went through high school and could go over there and reasonably safe. It's still, you're going to another country. Like, I'm not saying it was smart and we probably shouldn't have been over there at the time of day that we were.
Did you guys just know, like, if they were battling or there was an uprising going on, that you just knew to stay away? I mean, is that?
You did.
Yeah.
And towards the end of high school, that's when the next, war started. And so I was fortunate. I went off to college. And so my siblings' experience, I'm the oldest of four. My siblings' experience was probably a little bit different, but my parents and their parents, like everyone went to Mexico. And I remember as a kid, we'd go over on a Saturday. We'd go to the market. We'd go eat. My dad did a lot of business across the border. And, it just, when I went back to UTEP, outside of that drug war, like I actually, because I wanted to, and it still bothers me, if you drop me off in downtown Mexico City, I could survive. I know enough Spanish to get to where I need to go or get food, whatever. But I was never fluent. And my parents, for the most part, are. So when I went back to UTEP, I actually was going to live in Mexico because you're talking about a massive metroplex. And there's over 2 million plus people in Juarez and then in El Paso. But at that point, the war had started and it was just a little more dangerous to be over there. But that also provides some realities. Like, I think about the perspective of going to church and then after church, us, the youth group, whatever, we would go over to Mexico and along the border, when you were at UTEP, you could see I-10 and then there was Mexico.
Oh yeah, it's right there. Yeah.
And people had, people had houses and whatever.
Yep.
You go a couple miles beyond that you can't see, it's in the hills or the mountains. There are people in cardboard houses. It was a third world country. And And going over there and providing them. And now, mind you, I didn't grow up with a lot, but you have so much more appreciation for what you do have. And the fact that my dad had an opportunity to work and could put food on the table and you know, I'm not saying it was easy and for them and we weren't eating steak. You know, there were things I ate as a kid that I didn't know any better that now I'm like, wow, you know, that my kids have no idea. And
what would you eat?
We would eat Spam steaks and you know, like that was the one, deviled ham in cans and like that would be lunch.
Yeah.
You know, tuna can, like things that were just cheaper that maybe wasn't the best for you, but it put food in your stomach and things that, you know, I remember like, you know, eating like cream of celery and you know, soups that normally you would use for another dish. Like that was a meal. And, you know, but I loved it, you know, and you just learn to appreciate what you have. And then going over into Mexico, you see what people don't have.
Yeah.
And it's like they don't have electricity, they don't have heat, they don't have air conditioning when it's 110 in the summer.
Brutal.
And we're complaining because we had a swamp cooler back in the day. I don't know if people don't have swamp coolers anymore, but
I know
it was hot as hell. I mean, I remember like basically you don't sleep with anything on your bed because you're just sweating all night.
Yeah.
But then you go over there and you see like, wow, I have a bed, and if I needed a blanket, I had one. People don't know how hard it is until you see things like that, and it will always. It's been something that just I've always been a guy with glass half full, but it's like life could be so much worse. You know, I try to simplify it. My family's healthy. We have a roof over our head. I have a job. Money's never been a driver for me because I didn't really grow up with a lot. I had some very specific goals. But it provides great perspective that it could always be worse.
I've always said there's millions of people around the world at any given moment who would gladly trade your problems with you, trade problems with you straight up and smile and laugh on their way away from the trade, you know, because
100%.
we think that we have things rough sometimes and we have no idea.
Someone told me the other day, and you may know, and I haven't, you know, run the data, but the fact that we have houses and a job and, you know, family and all these things and you know, and not saying it's easy and sometimes, you know, because we're in this constant comparison, you know, because of social media and what others have versus what we have, that we're already a 1%er.
Yeah.
You know, when you look at the world population and, you know, sometimes I have to remind myself of that. Like I am living a life of luxury, you know, whether I believe it sometimes or not. Like, you know, I'm a driver, I'm ambitious, you know, you always, you know, want to do more but that's where like there's certain foundational things that like I don't ever want money to be a driver for me. You know, if money was a driver for me, I wouldn't be at Boise State. You know, I want to earn it. I want it to matter. You know, if anything, and this is, you know, because I don't want the job to be my identity, I want my legacy to be, you know, maybe different than others. I'm not in this industry to make X amount of dollars, or I just want to have an impact. I want to serve. I want to elevate the people around me and bring them along in a process and show people what's possible and to do it at a place like this that I care very much about and in a community that I love in a state. You know, it provides, you know, once again, like any bad day I have, I can look in the mirror and say, all right, like I'm doing pretty good. Like it could be worse.
Talk a little bit about your journey to the athletic director's office. And I think maybe just in terms of athletic administration in general. I mean, you growing up playing sports, you could have done a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Why go down this path of being in athletic administration? Where did that curiosity start or that path start?
It started my junior year of college.
Okay.
Long and short of it is, I had no idea this career path even existed. You know, as a kid, you go to the UTEP games. Those were my first memories. My grandfather was actually the team doctor for UTEP, so it was very close with Don Haskins, Glory Road. Everyone knows who Coach Haskins is. So growing up, going to their camps, going to football games, there was never very many people at those games.
Stadium is cool, by the way.
Stadium is awesome.
I love that stadium.
Yeah, and you know, you would go to these games, and I just probably like most fans thought like, all right, the game's at 7, everyone shows up, and that includes cheer and band, and the team, and you have no idea what really goes into it and the logistics behind it. So when I was in college, like I had played sport. I was not good enough to go play D1 like you and your 1% or the 1%. Like I was a solid high school player, got as much as I could out of my talent, and really enjoyed competing. And then you go to college, and it's like this whole new world. I don't have the discipline. I don't have the structure. I don't have mom and dad. They're there, but like not there, right? I'm at the University of Texas, so I'm in Austin. Austin was awesome at that point.
It's a big school.
Big school. I think it was the largest undergrad program in the country at that point in time. I know they always fluctuate.
Was that culture shock for a kid from El Paso?
It really, like, I grew up in a family that was very much committed to the University of Texas, and so I knew, like, not if I was going to college. I remember at a very early age, my mom would say, "And you're going to college." That was consistent. You're going to college. She knew what it would provide me, whatever I ended up doing. And she would always tell me, whatever your goals are, reach for excellence. And so I needed to figure out what I wanted to do. Well, I changed my major like 6 times. I wanted to be in the FBI. I wanted to be an attorney. I wanted to work. Almost because I had a social work class and I was volunteering. I'm like, wow, this could be it. But then the more I did that, I'm like, I don't know if my heart's strong enough to show up, the appropriate way, because you just saw and heard just horrible things. And so long and short of it is, I called my mom, and my aunt lived in Austin at that point.
Okay.
And long story short, I called my mom and said, and my aunt, because she was like my second mom, I said, hey, I'm going to take a semester off. I was working on 6th Street. I was enjoying Austin.
Okay.
My grades were average. Like, I didn't put a lot of commitment into it, but, I was passing classes. But I
6th Street, that's where the party is.
Where the party was. I worked at a bar and a club, and, and it was awesome. But when I told them, and this is how important my family is to me, when I told them I'm going to take a semester off, they knew more than I did at that point. And quite honestly, Nick, that would have been the death of me. I truly believe I would not be alive today because of the things that, like, the path I was going down with, the people I was hanging around with, and the things that we were doing. And everyone comes to these crossroads, and maybe they're endless, I don't know, but everyone has these moments in time. And my mom and aunt went into action. And my mom said, don't drop out yet. I want you to meet this woman's husband who I work with. His name is Mac Rhodes. And Mac, he's family and a brother and love him to death. But he was like an assistant AD for development, so fundraising. And maybe more like Bill's, like, it oversaw the fundraising at UTEP and small team. And she said, you're going to go meet with him, and then he got you on to a basketball camp. And I got to work this basketball camp. And I met with Mac, and I said, why did you, like, what is your job, and how did you choose this? And he told me everything. I wanted to be an administrator, not a coach, because of travel. I wanted a family, so on and so forth. You have a little more control over your career and your steps. And why he got into it. And then I went and met with Coach Haskins, and we talked a lot about coaching. And long and short of it is, I came out of those meetings with some level of direction of like, wow, like, I love sport. I've always loved sport. I could work in it. And it just was eye-opening to me. And Max said, when you're done, call me and you'll get an internship here at UTEP. I was from El Paso. Coach Haskins said, when you're done, if you want to coach, I'll help you get your foot in the door. And you could, at that point, you had to be like a video coordinator because I didn't play D1 and I grew up playing more basketball than anything. And then I went back to UT, and my aunt, who was the company she worked for was a sponsor at UT. She introduced me to Chris Plonsky and Chris Bloomfield, both still in the industry. And Plonsky is still at the University of Texas, and Chris Bloomfield works at another institution now. And I went in, and mind you, I was Austined out, long hair and earring, like I was all in, on Austin.
Okay.
So I got a haircut. I mean,
how long was your hair?
It was long enough to pull back, but I mean, it was, it was like below the ears, and I could pull it back. And,
earrings, you had some hardware in your face.
Oh
too?
yeah,
okay.
I had some hardware, and not hindsight, but at that point in time, like every professor, every person I knew in Austin had an earring. So like as much as I thought I was rebelling, like I just became like everyone else. So,
isn't that funny?
It's so stupid.
Doesn't it happen every time?
Yes.
People think they're rebelling and then they're actually just joining another clique.
Correct. And it was so dumb, but whatever. It was I wouldn't trade it for anything. So I go back to UT. I get this internship in the marketing department at UT. I get an internship with Longhorn Network, which was the equivalent of like Learfield here and Bronco Sports Properties. And I didn't drop out. I changed my major to sport administration. And then I had a little bit of runway to figure out, do I want to go professional, college, coach, or administration? And just the people that came into my life at that point and seeing what they did, and like my internship for Longhorn Network, I would sit at games, I would run signage. So back in the day, there was this box and I would push it and I would give AT&T or whatever sponsor, however many minutes they were supposed to get and during a football game, men's and women's basketball game. So I'd go to every game. Then I would work like marketing for a track meet or a soccer match or a softball game and throw out balls, like after a strikeout. And it was just it changed my life.
Yeah. And
all of a sudden school became important and I started getting A's and I actually cared and I stopped going out as much and partying and, it changed everything. And that's what really led to that moment of upon graduation upon walking, I needed an internship and I had an opportunity to go work for the Texans, Houston Texans at that point. They just come back, after they lost the Oilers. The Dallas Cowboys both ticket office, or I could go to UTEP and have this internship. And I called Mac and he said, let me call you back. I found out years later, and this is where God comes into my life of he wasn't necessarily going to give me that internship because his nephew wanted to intern. And he called his nephew and said, if you're not going to accept this job, I'm giving it to this other kid. And the nephew made a decision and chose to stay where he was at, and he was not going to take it. And I didn't find that out till years later. But I think about these moments of how people cared about me more than I cared about myself and helped me along in that process. I'm not an outlier. Like 1,000%, I am not an outlier. I had some really phenomenal people in my life that cared and were willing to pour into me and help me along that path. And so I go back to UTEP. I lived with my grandmother for almost 3 years, and then Mac got the AD job at the University of Akron, and and another life lesson for me. Like I was in marketing, promotions, and sales at that point. And that was my internship, and then my first full-time job was in marketing, promotions, and sales. After I would finish my duties, at this point, I had written down very specifically, I want to move up 3 years, move up or on. I wanted to be the youngest AD. I wanted to work at, my ultimate goal at that point was to be the AD at UTEP because it mattered to me. And that's what I was most familiar with. And I loved UTEP and still very much follow them. It's hard to take that out of an El Paso kid. Like those were my memories.
I'm sure.
And so I defined what my expectations were, the guardrails, and what I was going to hold myself accountable to. And so every day that I knew I needed to get into fundraising from Mac's leadership. If I wanted to be an AD, I had to drive revenue. And so as my duties were done in my day job, I would then go and volunteer and help the fundraising team.
Okay.
And once again, back to the work ethic, and no one cares, work harder. And it didn't mean I wasn't having fun or I didn't have a life. I had too much of a life probably at that point, but it just once again showed me, like, if I'm willing to do the work, I can elevate and commit to a process, epic as possible. And so I got into fundraising. And then when Mac went to the University of Akron, he brought me in as a young, I think I got the job at 25. I just turned 26 that December. I started in January and was an assistant AD for development.
I want to ask you about your time in Austin. You said something a while ago that I want to go back to, that you didn't even you don't even know if you'd still be alive today.
Yeah.
If something wouldn't have changed in your life with the path that you were headed on.
Yeah.
When you were in Austin. What was that like? What were those circumstances? Because that, looking at you today, I 100% see a blue collar kid from El Paso that's a grinder and that has values and is on a path and is mission driven and is focused. Yeah. Well, obviously at some point when you were in Austin, that wasn't the case.
Well, in many ways it was.
Okay.
My identity, and this grew over time. It's important to me as I sit here today that my identity is not being the AD. It's God, family, and this job, and that's how I prioritize my life. Not perfect, and things change, but I try to hold myself accountable to that. At that point in time, my identity was in 6th Street and partying, and it wasn't in anything of value. And and I saw what was going on there, and I knew enough, and there was always this seed inside of me of like, I'm not living right, and but I was really good at it, and I'm a social guy, and it checked a lot of boxes. I was having a great time.
Do you feel like you were hurt, you were struggling, you were covering up something, or was it simply like, hey, this is a hell of a lot of fun?
I think when I lost, athletics, it goes back to the identity piece. God wasn't my identity. It was something else, and it was more of this world. And when I lost my identity in high school was being an athlete and, a team captain and starting and going to, district championships and all these things. And when I lost that, I had this void that I should have filled with something more positive, like my faith, that I filled with other things, partying and going out and working on 6th Street. And I just, and I know it sounds dramatic, but I know, my personality, if I wouldn't have had that moment and that crossroad and those decisions and people in my life that said, hey, like, you're going down a bad road. And if I would have dropped out of school, Nick, like, I wouldn't have gone back and I wouldn't have had a degree. And ultimately I wouldn't have a master's, and God knows what would have happened to me, because I would have been not living for him or of him. I would have been living for something else. Yep. And that's where in my mind, knowing, my personality, that I don't like thinking about it all that much, because, there's these moments that, I know that if I wouldn't have found this path and had these people in my life, that maybe I would maybe best case scenario, I would still be on 6th Street, and there's nothing wrong. I'm not trying to downplay that, but like, I knew there was a greater purpose. I always felt that, but partying and drinking and hanging out and staying up late and doing all these things, it was killing the ambition. It was killing the path of greatness that I knew that I had in me. I just didn't have a space to truly apply it.
A space and an identity, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And now when I got into athletics, my identity then became fame and fortune. And that wasn't right either. I had other things that happened in my life that, I had to look in the mirror and say, all right, this isn't of value anymore. It was driving me, the title, the pay, the media aspect. And at that point, SportsCenter was blowing up, and you started to hear more about ADs and administrations, and
true.
It was just different.
It's true.
And look, that's maybe what got me there in terms of my why. But over the course of my career, I realized, joy, Jesus, others, yourself, and these moments in time that I had Hunter Yurchek, the AD at Arkansas, who pulled me into his office. I had never not hit a goal. I was a driver, and if you weren't with me, you were against me, and I would run you over, and it was these man or mouse, and it's like, I'm all in.
Yep.
I remember him saying, it means nothing if no one's with you when you do it. And in the first human emotion, this was at the University of Houston, and every position I've been in, I was always one of the youngest, maybe not the youngest, but one of the youngest. No one teaches you how to be a leader. They try. I'm not saying there is an effort, but there's no leadership book for dummies. Leadership is hard, and you're serving. I wasn't serving. I was serving me and my identity and what I ultimately wanted out of it. Well, he called me in, and at that moment, he basically called my attention to it and said, we're not going to operate this way. I care less about you reaching the goal if you're going to destroy everyone in the process. And I wasn't a jerk per se. I just, the goal drove everything for me. And you start with these human emotions of I'm going to quit. But I'm not a quitter. So then I'm struggling with that. And then it's all right, I'll take some ownership, but I'm still going to blame and point the finger. And then, the next step, and ultimately I got to a place, and my wife is a big part of this, and I had a kid at that point, of what do I want this to be? What is important to me? What is my why? And it just, over time, it doesn't happen like this, but it just started to change of my job is to serve, and I wanted to be a servant leader. And once again, there are no coincidences. I believe everything happens for a reason. I change my ways. I start bringing people along, and then all of a sudden I have this opportunity at Baylor. And so I'm forever grateful for Hunter and how he changed it, and joy, Jesus, others, yourself, and ultimately how I prioritize my life and wanting to serve and be and represent something bigger than myself, and understanding failure could still come. I can at least sleep at night,
Yeah. Doesn't it strike you sometimes how life is, it almost feels the opposite land? Some things are the opposite of what you expect. And I think leadership is one of those things.
Right.
Because we have this idea of what leadership is, and then when you actually are put in a position to lead and you learn that it's all about service and self-sacrifice and putting other people first, it's like, wait a minute, this wasn't in the handbook.
Correct.
And why do you think leadership is so misunderstood?
That's a good question. I think anytime you're dealing with people, we're all human and we all bring our stuff to the table, and whether we, believe we're doing it or not, like everyone is showing who they are on a daily basis. And there is no perfection to it. It's not like if you just do A plus B, it's going to equal C. When you're dealing with people, inherently they're going to bring forward their own identities in the process, and selfishness and ego and arrogance. I do as well. That's really hard to navigate, and in a society that's always telling you more money is better, and we want it as quickly as possible, and we're losing that work ethic and the idea of earning. I think it's just inherently challenging. But I can tell you on the other side of that is how much more it meant to me getting to, say, the CFP here and doing it as a team. And everything I say publicly to Bronco Nation, it's really telling myself and a constant reminder to myself, it takes a team. Plan the work the plan. No one cares, work harder. Like all of these things that I have to be locked in because of my responsibility, less about achieving goals and more about serving those that are under me. And the idea that my job is to elevate them and pour into them and help them as people helped me. That is the bucket filler for me. And it doesn't mean you always win. That's why I embrace the suck and those moments where you lose 4 games in a row, or maybe you don't make the CFP. It's just this constant process, and nothing stays the same. And so all to say, leadership is really challenging.
Jeremiah, how do you balance, servant leadership and humility with the reality that you've got a job to do, the reality that part of that job is creating objectives and vision and goals for the organization, and then holding people accountable to them, and that doesn't always come across in a servant leadership role. And how do you balance these realities of your life as a leader and as an AD?
It's challenging, but I do think to a certain extent that you have opportunities. For example, crucial conversations. If I truly care about you and I want what's best for you, it's my responsibility and ownership in it to make sure that you and I are aligned, and that I'm holding you accountable like a father would do to his children. My job is not to be everyone's friend. I love my team, but my job is not to be their friend. My job is to lead. And that means being uncomfortable. And the vast majority of growth occurs in the uncomfortableness. And that means if I'm not facing it head on and telling you, hey, I see what you're doing and this is good and this isn't, and I'm going to help you, and this is my ownership in it, and I'm going to spend more time, and I'm going to bring you along in this process, I'm doing them a disservice if I don't do that. And quite honestly, I look back at my own situation. I wish someone would have shown me where my blinders were earlier in the process, so I didn't have to have such a hard fall, when Hunter brought me in. That's not an indictment. Everyone's navigating their own things. But being a leader requires a different level of unselfishness and putting others before what you need. And I didn't have someone that pulled me aside, because everyone has pressure, and ultimately you project this pressure of, we got to hit this goal, we got to hit this goal. So that became my drive. We're going to hit it and we're going to blow past it. And in the process, I'm going to destroy people and drive people out of the industry, and didn't mean I didn't love them or care about them, but then you get to a place and you realize, man, how awesome would it be if not only we hit the goal, but I brought people along in the process and they believed. And they believed in what we're doing, but they most importantly believed in themselves, and it showed them a path to something greater. That's the legacy. That's the impact that, on a daily basis, the number of people I get to touch and talk to and hopefully provide support, that lives beyond our life on this earth. And that's the why now. It's serving our staff, our student athletes, and our supporters. And but it is hard. And to balance, I'm constantly in this game of like, do I go to my kid's game or do I make 10 more calls because we need money?
Yeah.
I remember Hunter, this was another example. He got in front of the football team and said his kid was an elite athlete and an All-American at Marshall. And he said, look, guys, my kid's playing on Saturdays too, so I'm not going to be at every game. And I know you may remember it for a few years. He will remember it for the rest of his life. And I'm going to prioritize my son over being at all of your games. Doesn't mean I don't love you. Doesn't mean I don't care for you. But he was showing them in that level of uncomfortableness, because every football coach, every football player is like, no, we are the priority, and we're going to sacrifice everything for the sake of winning, and so on and so forth. I don't necessarily disagree with that. At the same time, Hunter was making a life decision that was going to live on beyond him, that his kid knew and kids knew. They all played football in college, that his kids knew that he loved them and cared about them so much that he was willing to sacrifice. Daily, I'm making those decisions. Can I get to my kid's game and then back for a game? Or I can't go to every men's and women's basketball game because I have 3 kids and they're all in a sport, and I don't want them to get. I don't want to get to the end. What does this all mean then? Yeah, the goals never change. It's always what's next. It's always more.
Never stops.
It never stops. So in the moment, it may be uncomfortable, but at the end of the day, like, who's going to judge me at the end? God will, and how I lead and leave this world. That is what's most important to me, and not everyone will agree with that, and that's something that not easy. Like, and I'm not perfect at it. There are times that I'll go into the office or I'll do some things because you're in this constant negotiation. If I don't do this, this could happen. This could impact 100 people. This could impact my kid. And so I don't want to ever imply in the most humbling ways, like, I am imperfect. And that's why I have to fight to keep God, family, and this job as a priority.
Yeah, that's well said. Jeremiah, what are some of the biggest opportunities and maybe a couple of the biggest challenges facing Boise State athletics as we move forward into this year and going towards 2030?
When I think about authentic NIL, name, image, and likeness, the transfer portal, rev share, we have made so much progress, Nick, and I'm so proud of Bronco Nation, this community. I mean, the relationships I now have with people at the state level and the state board, and bringing them along in a process. But the cost of doing business is going up, and I have to work with my teammates, and that encompasses everyone I just mentioned. I know what we could do. I know we're stretching dollars better than anyone. I know it's leading to success, but we have to keep going. Because I do see the industry changing, and I'm very public about it, but you can see the group of 6 being pushed out, and that's who we are, whether we like it or not. I know we consider ourselves a Power 5 program, but we are identified, as a group of 6. And if this place if I represent something bigger than myself at this place, I owe it to be honest and transparent and bring people along in that process, and that's going to be the challenge moving forward. We are not an institution like the University of Texas and others. We are not an institution that we are held, we know what Bronco Nation's expectations are. But I also have some reality to my job that I can see the numbers and know that, we can compete, but it is going to be extremely challenging moving forward if we can't figure out the next step, and whatever that next step is. And that's additional revenue generation opportunities. That's why where we built the North End Zone. We got to find other streams. That's why we're going through a reseat. We have to almost reset the expectations and really define a path that will allow us to to not just survive the day, but succeed in the future, because I believe in what this brand represents. I believe in what we represent in this community and state, and the impact we have, and that level of competitive excellence that is required because of people like you and others. We are building off that foundation, and that's something that I live with every day, and that's something that's important to me. And so there's still a lot more ahead of us, but we have to find more. We don't need what everyone else has. We just need more than we got. And I believe in that because of our culture, because of our people who are our greatest asset, because of people like Spencer and Leon and Gordy and so on and so forth. We can do something epic, and nothing makes me more proud when I get calls from other ADs of, how are you doing this? We see the numbers, like, what are you doing? That starts with the why. And if we're truly serving and care, and care at a different level, and represent something bigger than ourselves, then epic is a possibility. And I believe we can continue to do that.
It's exciting to hear that, and I'm sure you're aware that it can be discouraging sometimes from the outside in when you just see the numbers and you see the financial limitations that we have, and the booster network limitations that we have, or the network of professional players that we lack compared to some of these other institutions. It's exciting to hear you say, like, listen, something epic is still on the table. Like, we can still do this. We can still break through to this next level. But what is it that you want people to understand about that, and to not be discouraged, and to know that we don't have to have what UT has, but we do need more than what we have currently?
Yeah, it takes a team. What are our, like, it's one thing for me to have expectations and I need to define them and then hold people accountable. I need to get them to believe like we believe, like I believe. I have my team. They believe. I need to continue to expand on that with our community and state, because I know what it looks like if we don't. And, and I'm not saying it's easy, but that's where every dollar counts. That's why, everything we're doing, from the travel site that we just created, to these camps that the collective just did, to the North End Zone, to season ticket, single game ticket, annual fund through the BA, Lyle Smith, every dollar counts. Every dollar is used to continue to elevate. We can't think about it like, and inherently people are going to individualize it. Well, this is impacting me and I'm upset. We have to somewhat look at the greater good of what we're doing and why we're doing it. I can't live with the status quo or insanity or average. I'm not average. I'm not saying I'm elite and great, but like, the goal is to be elite. I can't live with average. I'm never going to just operate a chair and accept a paycheck and just do enough. That is not my personality, and that is not my team's personality. And I need Bronco Nation to, which I believe they have, 10,000 donors, and it's awesome. But we can do this. It's just going to take a team. Everyone is going to have to take their part, and they're going to have to understand that there are decisions that are ahead of us that will be impactful. And it's not to personalize it or individualize it to each person that I'm trying to hurt anyone. I'm trying to elevate the collective institution and what we represent. And I'm grateful for Bronco Nation that's in the foxhole right now. And we just need more people, to really embrace what is this community with it or without the blue and the power of the blue. Specifically, that is a driver. And that's we're going to continue to throw things at the wall to see what sticks. Something is going to hit. And, and we're going to be able to stretch these dollars, and we will compete for national championships. And I firmly believe that if I can convince enough people to get on board.
What are some of the biggest things you have circled on your calendar for this year? Some of your biggest priorities?
Pac-12, we got to get some answers, and that I have a seat at that table. So I'm excited about that. I go to meetings this week on that. And, so Pac-12 is a big piece. We're close to accomplishing our unbridled campaign goal. Athletics, I believe, is already there, and that's a point of pride. And so what is next? You kind of have to always be in a capital campaign. This was our first comprehensive campaign as an institution. That shouldn't happen. It is what it is. We're a very young institution, so it's not judgment, but we got to constantly stay in that campaign mode and really drive the support and fundraising. So that's important to me. And then we have some decisions. The cost of doing business has gone up, and I need to be that much more strategic. And I'm going to spend a lot of the spring on figuring out what that looks like as we move forward. And and still hold on to, our purpose, which is to prepare these student athletes for life.
Okay, let's get a crystal ball question, which I know is always tough. But do you ever see a world where any of these schools that left the Pac-12, formerly Pac-10, would come back to that conference?
I do. I think, they're in the ACC. Well, at least two of them, Cal and Stanford, they're in the ACC. And I think we've lost, I know we've lost our way. Money has been a driver. And I said it earlier. I just don't, now look, money matters and every dollar counts. And people will say, well, why did you go to the Pac-12? My job is to elevate this place and best position us for what's next. And I believe Pac-12 does that. At the same time, the Pac-12 fits in our region. It allows travel for family and fan bases. It's where we recruit. It's who we serve. There's a lot of value in that. And, I think the industry has lost its way. I know they have. The fact that those student athletes are having to travel far east. You've heard the UCLA coach. You've heard others say, like, the travel. Yeah, it's a lot. I travel a lot. It sucks the life out of you. Like, what is our purpose in this? And I believe in this industry, and I'm young enough that I have a lot of years, hopefully, God willing, ahead of me that I can still be a part of something bigger than myself. And I believe in the value that college athletics brings. There is a difference in terms of professional sports and what we're doing. I'm fine with the student athletes getting paid, but we need parameters and guardrails, and we cannot forget our why. Our why is to prepare them for life. And I firmly believe that. Whether anyone else is going to say it, I believe that is what differentiates us from the Dallas Cowboys, the LA Lakers, the LA Dodgers. Like, that separates us. We are here to prepare people for life. And I'm sure you could speak to it in terms of your experience and getting a degree and getting into the career and choosing your career path and the qualities and characteristics that were built into you from being a part of a team and that brotherhood. It matters, and I see it every day impact this community in a positive way, and I'm going to fight tooth and nail to hold on to that.
It does matter, and when people talk to me about my story, that's all I talk about is all the lessons that I took from sports and all the great coaches and mentors that I had and everything I did with the rest of my life because of it. And the irony that I see in college athletics, Jeremiah, is it's like the one thing that made it special and made it different is what people have lost sight of.
Correct.
In terms of building student athletes and serving our communities and regional and local and investment into the community and who are you going to be after college and all these things. And my fear is, like, I look at the college athletics and I'm like, hey guys, I don't know if you realize this or not, but if it becomes all about business and money and who has more, you're going to lose to the NFL.
Correct.
You know what I mean?
Correct.
It's like at some point you're just going to get absorbed by the professional
league.
It,
Nick, like, what's the average lifespan of an NFL guy? 3.5, 4 years maybe, if you make it. These kids
Tops,
I mean, Ashton was, I think, 21 when he got drafted. Like, a good career is 10. I mean, a great career is 10 plus years.
Well, 3 to 6 is.
You're 31 years old with your whole life ahead of you. Like, what we're doing in these institutions and the programs that represent these communities, it matters. And a lot of our student athletes stay in this community and they become the pipeline for people like you and other industry leaders. And that matters. And that's where I'm hopeful the storytelling and the strategy that people are connecting those dots that it is, yes, winning is important, but winning is absolutely important. You don't play to lose. Like, winning is important. But there are other things that are just as important, if not more. And that's something that really drives me of the impact that hopefully we're having on the student athletes that we serve and what that path is for them, because very few people will go professional. It's like the old NCAA commercial. Like, very few people are going to go professional in sport, but they will go professional in something else. And how do we have an impact on that and create, and expand on the community that we've already formed? That's important.
And I would go a step further and say, even if you do go professional in sport, you're still going to want to go professional at something else because 100%. You're only going to be 30 years old when you're done being professional in sport.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
That's important.
Well, Jeremiah, you've been so gracious with your time, man. I have all the respect in the world for you. Love you like a brother. Respect you, look up to you. I'm so glad to have you as a friend. So glad to have you as a part of our community. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. And the feelings are mutual, and you're part of the team, and so I'm grateful for you.
One last question. What do you want your legacy to be? When this whole thing, the dust settles on your work and your body of work and the people that you've met and how you've treated people. I mean, what do you want Jeremiah Dickey's legacy to be?
Probably in a simplistic way. I want to be, first and foremost known as a man of God who was present and available for his family and was a servant leader in whatever community I am that I was in, and that the impact that I had would be felt long after I'm gone off this earth. That's important to me. It's not national championships, it's not winning, and that's part of it. I want to be known as a man of integrity that did what was right, and whether it was in my best interest, that ties into the service of those I love and care about, and that's probably more 30,000 feet, but that's how I approach every decision every day, and showing up to be what others need me to be. And to me, I think that's not just a potential realistic outcome, but, that's what I'm hopeful that, however long I'm here or wherever I end up going in life, that people say I had an impact.
Well, as they say down on Broadway, go Broncos.
Go Broncos. Thanks, brother.
You bet.